Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be selected for the International Research Award on Mathematics and Optimization Methods. In this presentation, I want to talk about the fractal geometry of different heart rates. But before getting started, I want to introduce fractals. What are fractals? A fractal is a never-ending pattern. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. They are created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. The term fractal was coined by Mandelbrot in the 1970s. Fractal geometry can be used to describe irregular and fragmented patterns in nature. In fact, fractal geometry presents a mathematical model for most of the complex phenomena, such as coastline, mountain, cloud, and fracture structures. One may think that fractals are only the result of mathematical calculations, but it's not true. The most interesting point is that many things in nature, they have fractals properties in them. The first fractals, they were discovered by a French mathematician named Gaston Julia, who discovered them decades before the advent of computer graphics. Julia's work was discovered by Mandelbrot in the 1970s. And the most famous fractals is the Mandelbrot cell, as we can see here. Fractals are also in dynamical system theory. A fractal is a mathematical object that is both self-similar and chaotic. Self-similar means that as you magnify the object, you can see the object over and over again in its parts. Chaotic means that fractals are infinitely complex. Amazingly, these beautiful objects of breathtaking complexity are generated by relatively simple mathematical process. Self-similarity in nature. But what is the definition of self-similarity? Self-similarity is the unifying concept for the theories of fractals and chaos. A phenomenon that is self-similar looks the same or behaves the same when viewed at different degrees of magnification or different scales on a dimension. The dimension can be a space, length, width, or time. A statistical self-similarity, such as coastline, crack in wall. Exact or geometric self-similarities, such as fern, spiral, binary tree. Fractals in nature, they don't exhibit self-similarity over all time scales. Self-similarity eventually breaks down. As we continue to zoom in here, we can magnify the object and see this object in details. And we see the same thing over and over again. This is called self-similarity. But what is fractal analysis? In fractal analysis, one of our tools is fractal dimension. One of the most famous formula for finding fractal dimension is called box counting fractal dimension. You assume A be a bounded set, and you define N to be minimum number of epsilon radius balls that are needed to cover A. But sometimes we use a just square like a box in this figure here, in these three maps. If this limit exists, then we call it as box counting dimension of A. In here, in this map, to calculate the fractal dimension using box counting method for a fractal, for example, object A, we imagine this fractal line on an evenly spaced grid and count how many boxes are required to cover the set. The box counting dimension is calculated by seeing how this number changes as we make the grid finer by applying a box counting algorithm. Fractal analysis. Fractals only tell us about an object in which a certain physical quantity is distributed evenly wherever it's found in the embedding space. There are situations in which physical quantities are unevenly distributed over the space. That is, the distribution may not be homogeneous and instead heterogeneous, in the sense that the density of the content over the occupied regions only are different. We therefore have to invoke the idea of multifractality, which tells us about the uneven or heterogeneous distribution of the content on a geometric support. What is multifractal analysis? The multifractal spectrum effectively shows the distribution of scaling exponents for an object. Equivalently, the multifractal spectrum provides a measure of how much the local regularity of an object varies in time. An object that is monofractal exhibits essentially the same regularity everywhere in time, and therefore has a multifractal spectrum with a narrow support. Conversely, a multifractal object exhibits variations in regularity over time and has a multifractal spectrum with wider support. So fractals are everywhere. We want to see fractals inside of our body. On the fractal geometry of different heart rates. In this study, we want to talk about congestive heart failure, which is a chronic condition in which the heart doesn't pump blood as well as it should do that. Heart failure can occur if the heart cannot pump systolic or fill diastolic adequately. And the symptoms include shortness of breath, fatigue, swollen legs, and rapid heartbeat. And what is the treatment? It can include eating less salt, limiting fluid intake, and taking prescriptions medications. As you can see in this figure, we can see this case happen for heart which cannot pump or cannot fill. So for this study, we started by looking at normal controls and to see how we can model the complexity of the normal control data that we have. So we selected this normal control people, And these signals, which are 15 number of signals for healthy or controlled people. And we estimated the multifractal spectrum for each one of these signals. These are heart signals. And the multifractal of all of them, all of these heart signals for normal control groups, all of them, they showed multifractal structure. The heart rate of healthy humans shows a multifractal process with a broad range of exponents. As we can see in the right-hand side of this slide, for each one of these signals, which are normal controls, we have this spectrum of exponent, and this wide range of exponents is a sign of being multifractal. It has been actually proved in 1990s that the control group, the normal people, their heart rates follow a multifractal structure. But how about patients with heart disease? So we have this 15 number of patients. These patients, they have heart disease. And we try to use the same analysis, multifractal analysis, to find out the structure of this data. So for each one of these signals, in the right-hand side of this slide, we found the corresponding multifractal spectrum. As we can see, the width of this multifractal spectrum is not as big as the previous slide for the normal control. Also, we have a change in the shape of the spectrum for some of these signals. So we call them, they are monofractal, not multifractal. So that's in the study, the irregularity of these type signals for patients with heart disease. When we apply this multifractal analysis, we notice that this spectrum of these patients for each signal shows a very narrow range of exponent, which is a sign of being monofractal. Actually, the multifractal analysis uses the spectrum of singularity exponents to provide a detailed and local description of complex scaling behavior of each one of these signals. We also tested other patients with arrhythmia. And as we noticed that, like the other group, this patient, we had 15 number of patients. And for each one, we computed the multifractal spectrum. And again, we have this change in the shape of the spectrum of each one of these signals. But unlike the healthy subjects, the signals with this congestive heart failure and arrhythmia, they show a clear loss of multifractality because the width of this spectrum is very narrow. And both types of heart disease are homogeneous and monofractal, therefore, since the spectrum displays a narrow width of scaling exponent. For these two cases, recordings demonstrate similar scaling features throughout the signal, and they can be characterized by only a single global exponent. However, for describing the control group, we need a spectrum of exponents because they are multifractal. Also, these results reveal that arrhythmia signals have narrower range of exponents compared to congestive heart failure. And this important finding may be used to differentiate these two classes of heart disease as well. So thanks to the theory of fractal geometry and introducing fractals to the world, which for the first time happened by Mandelbrot, we could differentiate, we could characterize heart disease from healthy control, as we noticed that patients with arrhythmia and congestive heart failure, their heart rates follow monofractal structure, and they only need one single exponent to just showing the complexity of this data. However, for normal control, we need a spectrum of exponent. And this is the huge difference between control people and patients with heart disease. Thank you so much for your attention. I want to say thanks for being selected and this nomination for International Research Award on Mathematics and Optimization Methods. Thank you.